Great evening. Just so you know, a little bit of housekeeping before I pass this off to Janice Weis. This session will be recorded, so if you don't want your video on or if you would like to rename yourself or anything, feel free to go ahead and do that now. We will also be having closed captioning available, so you can click the button at the bottom of the screen and be able to view the transcript from this event as well. And since it is recorded, it will be available for later viewing if you want to rewatch it or share it with other admitted students as well. So yeah, with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to Janice Weis, who is the director of our environmental law program here at Lewis and Clark. And if you decide to take environmental law classes or to be part of the program, you'll become very familiar with this wonderful person. So Janice?
Thank you, Tess. We're so excited that you're all here this evening. And I should say in turn that Tess is a wonderful resource as well. Not only does she work in our admissions department, obviously, but she received her JD and an LLM in environmental law from Lewis and Clark. So she's got a wealth of knowledge about the program as well. We're really delighted that you're here because we all think that environmental law really is an incredibly exciting, dynamic field. And clearly, many of you are considering this for your careers, and many of you may already be involved in the field. So we're really excited whenever we get to talk about the environmental program at Lewis and Clark. We're going to have two parts to our program this evening. In part one, we're going to talk about the program and give you an overview and some highlights of the program. And we're going to have a faculty member, a current student, and an alum walk us through that. And I will introduce each of the three of them in just one moment. Then we'll pause for questions at that point. So feel free to type questions in the chat or save them up for when we have the Q&A portion. And then we will move into the second part of our program, which will feature representatives from our two environmental clinics and from our two legal practica. And you'll have a chance to meet in breakout rooms with those folks in the second part as well. So that's the plan for the evening. I should say we're going to cover a lot of material. And so if you have specific questions about your professional goals, your plans, your aspirations, I know that all of us who are talking to you tonight would be delighted to answer any questions that you have after this program. So don't hesitate to reach out to any of us after this program. So with that, I'm going to introduce Professor Craig Johnston, who's going to start off our first part of our program. Craig is on our faculty, and sometimes it's hard to keep track of all the many things that he teaches because he really fills the regulatory pollution side of our program in exceptional ways. Craig teaches environmental law, which is our overview sort of gateway course, if you will. He also teaches a Clean Water Act course, a course on the Supreme Court and the environment, hazardous waste, and he also teaches and coaches our moot court team, something that he holds very dear to his heart. He teaches other things along the way, but has expertise in pollution and regulatory aspects. Craig is also a graduate of our law school, and so has wonderful perspectives from both a student and faculty perspective. Second, after that, will be a current student, Dara Illowsky. Dara is a third year. I can't believe that, Dara, that you're going to graduate this semester. Time flies. Dara is going to be giving you the perspective of a current student. And we were very excited to have Dara on this program because she has done really just about everything interesting that you can do in our environmental program. She's pursuing the environmental certificate, which we'll talk about in a little bit. She hails from New York and graduated with an environmental science degree from Brown. So she's got that nice geographic diversity for some of you who are interested in that. She's focused primarily here at the law school on public lands, wildlife and natural resources issues. And she'll tell you all about her experiences in a little bit. And then to bring this first part of our program on home is our wonderful alum, Marla Fox. Marla is a 2012 graduate of the law school. Marla, like Dara, also did pretty much everything interesting there is to do in the environmental program as a student. So she's got some great perspectives to share with you as well. Marla is currently a staff attorney at WildEarth Guardians, and she can give you a great view from her alum perspective of tying together her student and professional experiences. So with that, we're going to start with Craig to give some highlights of the program overall. Craig.
Thank you, Janice. As Janice mentioned, I have been teaching at the law school for a while. Actually, this is my 31st year. Before that, just to give you some perspective, I worked for EPA for 3 years and then worked for a big law firm in the Northwest for 3 years, but have been on the faculty since 1991. And the first thing that I want to just mention to you all is how incredibly rich our curriculum is. I don't think there's any law school in the country that has sort of all of the various nooks and crannies of environmental law covered as well as we do. Climate change, energy law, environmental justice, international environmental law, natural resources and public lands, pollution. We have multiple courses in all of those areas. And as Janice sort of indicated with respect to Dara, most students actually will take the overview class and then they'll sort of specialize in one of those sub areas. And again, there's enough richness there that if you come out of our curriculum, you can really be ready to hit the ground running in whatever specialty you are interested in pursuing. Beyond that, as Janice mentioned, we also have certificates, one general one in environmental law and a more specific one in energy, innovation, and sustainability. Obviously, that's catered both toward people who are interested in energy law specifically, but also in terms of making that work in the corporate context and advising folks who may want to, sort of be more on a planning end than on a litigating end. And then again, beyond all that, there are practical skills. And you'll be hearing later on from folks from our two main clinics, Earthrise, which focuses on litigation, domestic litigation in the natural resources and in the pollution law area. The Global Law Alliance, which focuses both on international environmental law and protecting animals internationally. And also from two of our practica. We have one called the Western Resources Legal Center and another called the Environment and Natural Resources Legal Practica, or Practicum, excuse me. And in those contexts, you can, in addition to at the clinics, you can work either downtown with companies or with governmental agencies or right here on campus with regard to the Western Resources Legal Center, on whatever side of these issues you want to get experience on. So we try to be a well-rounded program. Beyond that, I think the main thing, and I forgot one area of practical skills, and that is environmental moot court, which is by far the most important thing for you to do while you're in law school. I'm just kidding, but it's an area to really practice, and practice they do, communicating clearly about the law. It's focused on appellate advocacy, but really those are skills that come into play significantly, whatever you may be doing as a lawyer, excuse me. The last thing that I'll mention is just how incredibly rich our network of alums is and the things that people are doing out there in the real world. We've had certainly a preeminent environmental law program for 40 years or more. What that has meant is that we've been graduating people who've been going to work for EPA or for the Department of Interior or for big law firms or for public interest groups. Happily, the vast majority of them love Lewis and Clark, and they know what our environmental program is all about. All of our faculty who teach in this area keep at least 1 foot firmly planted in the real world and care about how this stuff is applied. And so our grads graduate from Lewis and Clark really knowing how to solve problems out there in the real world. It's not a theoretical program. It's a program that is geared toward training environmental lawyers of whatever stripe, and again, whatever side people want to work on. And the nice aspect about that is, again, our alums know that, they love it. They like to hire other Lewis and Clark people. And many of us, spend a lot of time making phone calls on behalf of students and trying to get them to whatever agency or public interest group or law firm they might want to work for afterwards. So to me, if I were an incoming student or a potential incoming student, that's one thing that I would want to be considering as well.
Great. Thank you, Craig, for that great overview. And speaking of students, perfect segue to Dara. As I mentioned, if you've joined us late, Dara is a third-year law student with us in the environmental program, and she's going to give you some highlights on her experience at Lewis and Clark. So Dara, take it away.
Yeah, hi, thank you all so much for being here tonight. It's great that you're taking the time to learn more about our school. So I'm Dara. I am in my third year. I'm originally from the East Coast, so it's not impossible to make that transition out here. But yeah, as Janice already said, I am focused mostly on public lands, wildlife, and natural resources law. And I take a public interest litigation path for that. So I've worked during the summers for 2 different public interest environmental firms, both based here in Portland. And then I've also, in terms of work experience, spent time externing at the Center for Biological Diversity, which is a big environmental nonprofit with a couple different offices around the country, including one in Portland. So I'm gonna do a little overview of all the things I've done, because there's a lot. So I'm going to go through that quickly, and then if you have questions later about any of those specific experiences, I welcome them in the Q&A section. But to quickly rattle those off, I am the 9th Circuit Review editor of Environmental Law Review. Environmental Law Review is one of the premier only environmental law focused journals in the country. And 9th Circuit Review is a subset of Environmental Law Review, which is focused on big environmental cases that are coming out of the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals. So our members summarize those cases and then also have an opportunity to potentially publish a paper at the end of their time on 9th Circuit Review. I am also a current student director and former board member of Northwest Environmental Defense Center, which is an independent nonprofit focused on environmental protection in the Pacific Northwest. But it is based on Lewis and Clark's campus. It is independent, but it's on Lewis and Clark's campus, and most of the work is done by student volunteers. So NEDC is a really amazing, unique opportunity to get hands-on involvement in environmental law work, even as a 1L. I started my work with NEDC as a 1L in the Public Lands and Wildlife group. So you can, really hit the ground running. And when I was looking at law schools, I don't think I found a single one that had opportunities like that for 1Ls. And you can continue your involvement with NEDC all through law school, as I have. I am also in Earthrise, which you'll hear about more later, so I won't talk too much on that, but I am a student in Earthrise, and it's been a really great experience. I also am on the Energy Law Moot Court team, which was new last year, coached by Professor Johnston. We just turned in our brief this morning, so that's been a big lift recently, but a really positive one. Like Professor Johnston noted, it's just been a really amazing experience practicing writing and having to take a record and come up with my own arguments. And that's another experience that is just so unique to schools like Lewis and Clark. And gosh, what else do? I have my resume up because I was I'm definitely going to forget something. Oh, I've also, I've worked for a couple different professors. So there's a lot of opportunity to work kind of on, in a lot of cases, the cutting edge of academic research here at Lewis and Clark. So for example, right now I'm writing a paper with Professor Michael Blum about the proposed removal of 4 dams on the Klamath River. And a lot of my friends actually are involved in like various projects getting publishable work out in the world, which is very cool. Yeah, so those are some of the highlights of my experience here in the environmental program. Again, please, any questions later. One thing I just wanted to throw out there in terms of advice, and Professor Johnston kind of hinted at this a little bit, but I think when I'm looking back on my time trying to decide which law school to go to, what it really came down to in the end was where my needs would best be served. So I guess without naming any of the other schools it came down to for me, but it was pretty much Lewis and Clark, another similar school, a peer school, that like very focused on environmental law, and then a school that was frankly ranked higher than both of those schools, but did not have the environmental program that I was looking for. I knew 100% I wanted to do environmental law. I was working at the Sierra Club before coming to law school. I'd only done environmental work. I had my undergrad degree in environmental science. Not to say that you need to have that background to then go into environmental law, just that when I thought about what I wanted from law school, I knew it was environmental law, and I knew it was public interest environmental law, and I didn't want to go somewhere where I would be forced to do something that I didn't want to do, like big law, which for some people is the right choice. For me, I just knew it wasn't. And when I visited Lewis and Clark, I knew that I would be supported in whatever it was that I wanted to pursue, and that I would have the professor network, the alumni network, and the student network that was going to allow me to feel supported through that process. And that's definitely been my experience here over the last 3 years as well. So yeah, in the end, when I looked at that school that was higher ranked, at the end of the day, I just said, you know, I don't know that they can give me what Lewis and Clark can give me. And 3 years later, I still believe that. So that's my advice.
That's great, Dara. Thank you so much. Marla, give us your perspectives from your alum vantage point now that you've been out a couple of years.
Oh my gosh, I've been out more years than I realized.
I know.
I am coming close on my public service loan forgiveness, so that's exciting. So yeah, I graduated in 2012, and I currently work as a staff attorney with WildEarth Guardians. We work across the West, but I live in the Columbia Gorge. So I did not stray far from Portland after going to Lewis and Clark. And before law school, I spent 1 year teaching English in Japan with the JET program, and then 2 years doing grants and contracts work. It ended up being at a hospital because it's like whatever I could get my hands on, but I'd been given the advice that you should try reading regulations before you actually commit to law school. And that's one of my tips is tips of advice when you're thinking about law school, wherever you end up going, is really thinking about or getting a taste for the work, if at all possible, whether it's just looking at the work that people do that you think you want to do, or getting a job in the type of work that you might want to try out someday, because it's a big investment, both time and resources. So definitely a tip there. How did I get my staff attorney job at Guardians? So first job out of law school, I went to work for the Northwest Environmental Defense Center, which Dara noted is a separate entity, a separate nonprofit, but located on the law school campus. So I stayed on the law school campus for an additional couple of years and doing mostly pollution control work. So Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, citizen suit enforcement work. And then another former alum, so Professor Johnston mentioned all of this network of alums. I'm not a big schmoozer. I don't like to schmooze, but a former alum who worked at Guardians reached out to me and was like, hey, we have this job posting. Can you circulate it with your students that you work with at NEDC? And I said, wait a minute. Yeah, I'll circulate it, but I'm going to apply. So that's how I even first heard about WildEarth Guardians, was through an alum who had graduated many years before me. She didn't, we didn't even cross paths during law school, but that's the type of community that Lewis and Clark creates. especially within the environmental program. And so I got my foot in the door at Guardians doing more program advocacy work. And then a few years ago in 2019, I switched to the legal team and now do primarily litigation. And I will say that 3 of the 4 staff attorneys on our legal team are Lewis and Clark graduates, one of whom did moot court with me with Craig Johnston, Daniel Timmons, and then another who graduated before us. And so we're pretty proud of that fact. And we have a very good record right now at Guardians on our wins. What are the other questions? Experiences in law school. So yes, I did Northwest Environmental Defense Center. I did Earthrise Law Clinic. I think looking back on it, there are even more opportunities now than when I was there. And when I was at law school, it felt like I couldn't do everything. There were really difficult decisions to be made. Like I chose to do moot court. Craig Johnston talked me into it, but then I decided not to do law review. And instead I wrote a law review article that got published with Professor Blum, another thing that Dara had mentioned. So yeah, there's just so many opportunities and the classes, it's like amazing because you have to choose between all of these specialty courses that don't even exist at other schools. So that was really cool. What other things? I'm probably missing other stuff. I mean, Earthrise was great. Highly recommend that as well. And then, oh, for my summers, so my first summer I worked with the Northwest Environmental Defense Center as their law clerk. And then my second summer I worked with Earth Justice in Oakland. And that again was I attribute that connection to an Earthrise alum or a Lewis and Clark alum who was working in the Oakland office at Earth Justice there. So got hired by her. And advice to potential law school applicants. Like I said before, try to get at least a little experience or do some research about what legal work is really like to see if it's what you want to commit to, given that it is a big commitment. And there's so many opportunities once you get into law school that, you know, understanding at least a little bit maybe of what your preferences might be will help, I think, in making some of those difficult choices about where you want to spend your time. And then be ready to spend a lot of time committed to the law school. I mean, you know, even if you just do the courses, it's a huge commitment. And so just be ready for that and to give it your all, because for me, at least, that's the hardest I've ever worked. And I'm glad I loved law school, and I wouldn't want to feel like I regretted any aspect of it. So having a little bit of foundation before you go in is huge. Janice, did I cover everything?
You did. I was just going to say thank you. That was a great, great review. Thanks, Marla. Well, thanks you 3. I think that gave us a great perspective on the program from your 3 vantage points. We've got some time now for questions from all of you potential students, those of you who are considering Lewis and Clark and other opportunities. Feel free to unmute yourself, put your video on and wave your hand. You can ask a question that way. Also, feel free to type it in the chat. We are trying to track those. So let me just pause for breath here for a moment and let you gather your thoughts for questions that you might have. And I've got a few follow-up questions that might be helpful as well. But anyone in the potential student category who wants to ask any of our 3 panelists a question. Okay, thanks, Amy. Amy has a question. What is the difference between a certificate and a specialty? Craig, do you want to tackle that one since you raised the certificates?
So to me, a certificate really is just a formal way of recognizing a specialty. The idea is that we have put some thought into what are the core courses and what are the specialized courses that you would sort of expect any person who, you know, really wants to call him or herself an environmental lawyer to have, and there is a GPA requirement associated with it as well, but it's not that daunting. And there needs to be a paper with most of the certificate programs as well. But so the idea is, it's kind of like a college major. It's just a certification of the fact that you have focused in this area. And these are just our 2 environmental certificates. There are other certificates at the law school as well, in criminal law and in intellectual property law and in other areas. But it's just formal recognition that someone has done something that the institution and the faculty think sort of merits recognizing that someone has developed a particular skill set.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. And Amy, I hope that answers your question. The other thing that I would just add about the certificates is they do honor and recognize a specialty. As Craig mentioned, it's something you put on your resume. You know, both Marla and Dara certainly did, and our students do. And it certainly highlights you in the market as somebody who's really, you know, taken the effort to concentrate, you know, on the area. On the flip side, we've made the requirements flexible enough that there's room in your schedule to take non-environmental classes, and you should. Part of my job is to help advise students on what classes to take. And as we've all mentioned, we have an incredible array of environmental courses at Lewis and Clark. You can't take them all. It'd be nice if you could, but you need to move out into the world at some point and do that. But there's other great lawyering classes that are good to take depending on your professional plans. Alternative dispute resolution, for example, evidence, those kinds of things. So the certificates do honor the specialty, but I do want to say plenty of room to get good lawyering skills. We want you to be a great lawyer when you graduate, in addition to being, you know, a specialist. Okay, so some other questions popping up here. If you were hoping to do international environmental law, would you recommend getting certificates in both? Or could you just take classes in both and do a certificate in one? I'll respond to this one, and anyone else jump in if they want. We work very closely with any student who wants to get 2 certificates for the reasons that I just mentioned. We want to make sure that you're taking good basic lawyering classes, and also the bar exam, that wonderful thing you get to do at the end of all of your law school experience, does not have environmental law or international law on it. Some bars have tiny little snippets of environmental. So it's also important that you get your bar classes in, you know, as well. So if you're interested in 2 certificates, we would work very closely with you just to make sure that's going to work with all of your other curriculum plans. But Jesse, to answer your question more specifically, yes, you could get certificates. We have the international one and the environmental one, or as you state, you could just take classes in both. And you can highlight that in your cover letter and your resume as an area of competency. Certificates are great. They're not the end all be all. So you could certainly highlight your curriculum in different ways. And Marla is saying, don't forget about remedies as a good class to take per my remark that there's lots of non-environmental courses that will serve you well as an environmental lawyer. Susanna, I think we answered your question. How common is it to get multiple certificates? We really suggest students just get one for all the reasons we've discussed. But we certainly work with students who want to do more than one. There's so much to do at Lewis and Clark that, you know, you'll want to balance, you know, with everything. Let's see, other questions. What opportunities do incoming or 1L students have to explore environmental opportunities in addition to NEDC? NEDC being, of course, something mentioned by both Marla and Dara. Are there resources we should explore outside of any official sites? So first, let's tackle the Dara and Marla. What suggestions would you make for incoming 1L students to explore environmental opportunities? Again, knowing that they're not taking classes in the area, but just other suggestions in addition to NEDC.
I can start. I mean, I do want to highlight EDC, because I also kind of want to, in part, answer this question from Thulan. I'm sorry, I'm probably not saying your name right.
It's Tulan.
Tulan, great, thank you. But NEDC, so part of the way it works is we have a bunch of different project groups covering different parts of environmental law. So like public lands, water, air, climate and energy, food and ag, environmental justice. I think that's all of them. I might have missed one, but it's a great way you can dabble in multiple groups and try different topics and see what fits you. But aside from that, we have a bunch of other environmental groups as well that offer various ways to start to explore as a 1L. So we have Environmental Law Caucus, which is kind of like a social hub for environmental students. And then we have Student Angling Law Society, which sounds like a fishing group, and in some ways it is. Like, they do plan fishing trips, but they also do things like they had a film screening of Damnation, and they've hosted like networking events for students interested in like wildlife law and stuff like that. We have the Natural Resources Law Student Association. Is that their name? They're kind of new, and so I haven't had any involvement with them, but that's a new group on campus. There's a food and agriculture group. There's just a million different environmental groups that you can get involved with. And the main one doing kind of like substantive work is NEDC, but all of those others present really great opportunities for volunteer work or to just network with people whose work you're interested in.
Great. Marla, would you add anything to that about 1L involvement?
I mean, Dara covered a lot of it, like 1L substantive, getting your hands on environmental definitely was NEDC, but in terms of those other student groups, it's networking with attorneys right in the area or on campus that they bring on as speakers, but also networking with the other students. So getting to know 2Ls, 3Ls who can tell you like, this professor is awesome. This class is a ton of work, but it's worth it. Watch out for this exam. Like, all those things can be really useful as a 1L while you're just drinking from the fire hose that first semester, because you are trying to concentrate on those core classes. So they don't want you to get too overwhelmed, but there is plenty of ways to learn about it and start to like plan out where you think you might be headed during that first semester of 1L.
And I would just add, Dara touched on this, but we do have multiple student groups involved in environmental issues, not just one. We have multiple, and Dara listed just several of them. And through those groups and through the environmental program, we have talks and conferences all year long where we bring really interesting speakers to campus, or film festivals, or filming screenings like Dara mentioned. And that is really great as a 1L because, again, you came for environmental law, you really want to get exposure. It's an amazing way to learn about interesting careers and cutting edge emerging environmental issues. And so we have a wealth of speakers and conferences, and all of our students are invited to attend. So that's another really wonderful way to network and get involved and get exposure, you know, as you're saying, to the program. We have a question about public interest loan forgiveness. And I will mention that I can send you a resource. Kiana is asking this question. We have folks in our career services office who are up to the minute on sometimes the changing nature of the laws that apply to that. But it's a great question because obviously many of you may be considering public interest careers and wanting to know how that fits in with paying tuition and all of that good stuff. So Kiana, I will plan, or Mimi or Tessa, I will plan to send you that resource so that you know that. And of course, if anyone else has questions about that, it's a really good, studying the economics of all of this is of course a very good, smart thing to do. And I see that our admissions folks have put links in the chat to some of our clubs. Let's see. Oh, we have a great question on opportunities to get involved with environmental justice issues, or what courses are available? Craig, do you want to tackle that one, and I'll fill in anything else on? You might mention Lisa's class, for example.
Yeah, we actually now have an embarrassment of riches in terms of people who will be teaching environmental justice in the future, because in the past few years we hired Lisa Benjamin, who is definitely a superstar and makes that one of her primary areas, and we just have a new hire coming in next fall of a woman who's interested in teaching in the EJ area as well. But beyond that, there are a number of groups throughout the Northwest that are looking for student help, and that can provide opportunities for students either on a externship or for credit or I'm not sure about pay, frankly, but students who are interested in environmental justice have found a lot of opportunities, both in Portland and in Seattle, and with tribes to sort of pursue those objectives. We have 270 sovereign tribes in the Northwest, and certainly in many circumstances, sadly, they face disproportionate burdens. Among other things, one of the biggest issues out here is about fish tissue levels for toxins in fish, and how do we make the states and EPA recognize the fact that a lot of tribal people, perhaps not surprisingly, eat a whole lot more fish than the average U.S. citizen does. And actually, Oregon has made some great progress in that area. Washington is a little farther behind, but I'm not sure about Idaho and Alaska. But in any event, there is a lot of environmental justice work out here. People are very attuned to this issue, and right now is the best administration ever in the United States government to address those concerns, both at EPA and at the Department of Interior. They certainly are focusing on that more than any prior administration has.
Great, thanks, Craig. Good question on COVID, the ever-present cloud hanging over our heads. Toulon had that question again. Another good question. So we have actually been in person during the pandemic. In the spring of 2020, we went remote like everybody, but we have been in person with very strict precautions when the times were particularly tough. Limited number of people in the classroom, very spread out, etc. And this fall of 2021, we started back in person again. We don't have the same heads in the room restrictions, but still masked. Oregon has a mask mandate, so everyone's still being very, very careful on our campus. So we made it through the fall semester. And then we started this semester remote, like so many places, just given the variant. But we are going back next week in person, again, with all precautions and masking and being very careful. So looking ahead to the fall, we're very optimistic that we will continue to be in person. And your question is a good one, not just in terms of classes, because that's of course of interest to all of you. Will you be remote or in person? And we've been fortunate to be, mostly in person. But of course, many of our events have been remote, even with us being back on campus, just because bringing a lot of visitors, and speakers who have to travel and all of that stuff. So we've done many of our events remotely, which has its downsides, of course, but the upside is we have alums from all over the world who've been able to attend all these great talks, so, and good networking for our students. We've set up some great little, remote networking sessions. But again, looking towards the fall, our plan is to be in person and doing as many of our events in person as we can. So fingers crossed about that. And then a question also about international opportunities. I'll just say something very briefly, because you're going to have the great fortune of hearing in a little bit from some of the folks who teach in our international curricula and who run our international environmental clinic. So I will just say super briefly, we've got some wonderful courses: international environmental law, international climate change. Professor Lyman also teaches a summer international wildlife course. We also have non-environmental international courses that dovetail beautifully with that competency area. And then, of course, the International Environmental Clinic that you'll hear more about. Also, you have an opportunity to go anywhere in the world to do what we call an externship. So you can go full-time to some amazing place, again, pandemic permitting, and work for an NGO or other legal organization internationally and earn credit towards your law degree. So that's another option. So lots of options internationally. So I hope that answers your question, Tulon. Thanks for those. I see we're getting the question answered about, yes, no geographical boundaries to our externship program. We've had people in the coolest places in the world, and we keep a list of those if anyone would like to see them. Here's a good question for you, maybe Craig and Marla, because you're both connected with alums. Question about alumni community in Seattle. Do we have an alumni presence in Seattle, or is it mostly Portland based? Just curious in regard to opportunities post-graduation. Craig, why don't you start and then Marla add?
Okay. I suspect that we have more people doing environmental law in Seattle and in the state of Washington than any other law school does. Because we are fortunate that none of the Washington law schools really have a strength in the environmental area. So, if you looked at EPA's regional office in Seattle, or if you looked at the state of Washington Department of Ecology, or if you looked at the big law firms in Seattle that do environmental law, I strongly suspect in any one of those contexts, and also in the public interest context, I probably should add, you would find probably more Lewis and Clark alums than alums from any other law school. So not as many as there are in Portland, because one of the problems that we have is so many students come here and they fall in love with Portland, and they are determined to try to stay here. And fortunately, the Portland legal market has been healthy, and especially in the environmental area, there probably are more public interest environmental groups that litigate in Portland than there are in maybe any city in the country other than San Francisco as well. But in any event, we certainly have infiltrated the entire Northwest. There are Lewis and Clark alums everywhere, on every side of these issues, and in every subspecialty in the environmental area.
Marla, what would you say about the alumni network generally?
I mean, I'm surprised to find Lewis and Clark alum everywhere, like everywhere, when you are working in that public interest environmental sphere, right? So definitely in Seattle, there's plenty of people who graduated with me, before me, after me, who are working in the Seattle area. I took my bar exam was in Washington State because I was doing work in Spokane for NEDC. And then I ended up taking the Oregon bar as well. So, there's people all over, and I'm surprised at how broad the geographic scope is. There's a lot of Lewis and Clark alum in DC, a lot in California. I mean, yeah.
Everywhere, yes.
Yeah.
We should say to that point, we have a national job market. Our students, as Craig said, they want to stay in Portland. It's a wonderful place to be. That's certainly an opportunity, Pacific Northwest. But we have a national job database, and we have national placement. And so our students, as Marla said, get jobs everywhere. So you're not geographically limited by coming to Lewis and Clark. We teach law, environmental law, that serves you well across the country. It's not Oregon specific, with the exception of a few classes that focus in that area. You're ready to practice anywhere, internationally or any state in the US, and would have great resources at finding a job anywhere. Dara is going to Alaska after graduation, And we've got alums all over that state as well. There's no law school there. You know, lots of opportunities across the country.
Can I make a point about DC?
Yeah.
So putting aside the pandemic, the law school has an event every single year in Washington, DC, and the dean goes back, and usually I go back as well. And we invite all of our alums who are in DC, and there might be 50 to 60 people on average that come. That shows a couple things. First of all, it shows that our alums really, really like to find out what's going on at the law school. But secondly, of those 50 or 60 people, 40 or 50 of them are environmental people. And it's just so impressive. And by the way, you know, they, based on, in part on these events, they become friendly with each other. And they have, you know, what in common, that they all went to Lewis and Clark. And so now if you're 2 years out of law school, you're meeting people who are 15 years out of law school, or even 25 years out of law school, who are in various positions with various agencies. And so it's you know, I've heard it referred to as an environmental mafia of Lewis and Clark people in DC. And it's really extraordinary. I don't think any other law school has events like that are dominated by environmental alums in Washington, DC, that we have. I'd be astonished.
Right. That's great. We have a question about externships. Great question, great practical question. Are they completed during the semester with courses at the same time? How does that work if the externship is abroad? So there's a couple different models for our externships. The one that I mentioned first, which is a full-time externship, you are not taking classes at the same time. Your entire semester is working full-time for that organization, government entity, whatever it is that you are placed with, which gives you then that flexibility to go abroad or to New York, or name your spot. It's a full-time gig, and you get a semester's worth of credit for doing that. It does take some organization, because you aren't taking classes during that time period and need to organize your other courses around that experience. So that's the model that the question is about. We also have part-time externship options. So if you still want to take some courses, but want some practical experience with a nonprofit or government entity, you can do a part-time externship. Obviously, then you're in Portland because you're taking classes at the same time. But there's an abundance of opportunities in Portland to do some practical experience. And in fact, you'll hear a little bit later, one of our practica focuses on opportunities in the Portland area. It's not an externship, but it's a similar model. And so you'll get a sense of how that works as well. So hopefully that answered that question. Let's see. Oh, Dara, good point. Dara is reminding me, there was a good question earlier about work-life balance, school life balance. I think that's a great question. I think the question was, you know, how Marla and Dara in particular, and Craig, if you've got advice, how did you manage the work-life balance in law school? Dara, do you want to take a stab at that? Both of you are good models, because you did a lot in law school, but remained happy, healthy. So what would you say about that, Dara? And then Marla, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge, and something that has been a challenge for me throughout law school. It does kind of ebb and flow in my experience, which makes it feel a little bit more manageable. So like 1L year was pretty steady. You just have to find your schedule and figure out how you're going to set aside time. And it does have to be, in my experience, a very intentional setting aside of time. So like 1L year, I was able to, for the most part, except maybe for like close to final season, like I was just very committed to 1 day a week. I was doing no law school. And I know that's worked for a lot of people. I think that was advice I was given by somebody in my 1L year. I don't think I came up with that myself. So yeah, the reality is I don't think I had many, if any, friends, including or myself, who were able to take like the whole weekend off because you have Monday classes to prepare for. But if I like made a conscious effort to say like Saturday is no law school day, that was definitely possible. And Portland is a great place to be able to do that because you have like Portland. I think Portland likes to say that it's like an hour from the coast and an hour from the mountains, which is, it's more like an hour and a half to each, but like both in the city and just outside the city, there's amazing outdoor opportunities. If you're not such an outdoorsy person, I mean, the city is amazing. I really like Portland because I feel like it's the perfect size where it's small enough that it's not overwhelming, but it's big enough that it has everything you really need. So it's a really great place to be able to balance because you don't have to go very far to like take a little break and do something fun. My second 2L year is infamously harder at most law schools. You're taking on more responsibilities than you did your 1L year in terms of student organizations. Maybe you have a job now. There's just so many more opportunities by the time you're in your second year that it becomes harder to find that balance. At least that was my experience. But it is not that bad because you're at least doing things you want to do. So having less time 2L year, I think I was maybe still happier than 1L year because I got to choose my schedule and my agenda and what things I wanted to spend my time on. And I will admit I wasn't great at the balance though. I kind of let go at times of that, like setting aside of time for myself. And I would not suggest that path. But yeah, I was still able definitely to consciously take space because of what Portland and my environment was able to offer me. That said, my 2L year was weird because that was the really bad COVID year. So I don't know how things would have looked if I was able to, you know, access more than what I was able to access because of COVID restrictions. So yeah.
Good point. Thanks, Dara. Marla, what would you say about that work-life balance?
Definitely law school is busy. And so it's good to be, you know, self-aware of that and be kind of intentional when you step into that space, because you know it's going to be probably the hardest you're going to work. It's way different than college. One thing I really liked about Lewis and Clark, I had a rental home really close to the campus, and you have Tryon Creek State Park right there. So I would go for runs all the time if I just had 30 minutes. And that was a huge way for me to balance. I did track through college. And so it was like, that was my way to release. I also came from Minnesota where the rain, running in the rain was awesome, but also like, if it's raining out, I guess I'll just go read a book, right? Like it wasn't, there was very little to distract me from camp, like being on campus. So that was actually really nice. And I didn't have this fear of missing out on things. And then in second and third year, as things got busier, you also got closer to the other students. And so doing things together in a fun, you know, it was fun to do some of these like court prep. I'll say it. It was fun. It was really fun. So, you know, finding the balance that way, finding joy in the work itself is part of it for me.
That's great. And you didn't just say that because Craig is right here. I'm sure. Craig, anything you would add before we wrap up this part of our session?
The only thing I guess I would say, and it's pretty much redundant, is, you know, especially if you're interested in environmental law, then what Dara said is true. You're doing exactly what you want to be doing, and I think that makes a lot of difference once you get to your second and third year, because again, there are so many students here who are interested in that. The students here are very, very supportive of each other, and there's a culture of, hey, let's throw ourselves into this, whether it's moot court or whether it's environmental law review or, you know, whatever it might be. I think one thing I see consistently over the years is, you know, all the students who are the most interested in environmental law, I think, are the students who enjoy law school the most.
I think that's true. Well, thank you, the three of you, Craig and Dara and Marla, for being with us during this part of our program. Really, really appreciate your perspectives, and potential students, I hope that they were helpful. So thank you, three of you, and you're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to slip off and do other things. But thank you very much for your time. We're going to move now into the second part of our program. Before we do that, let me just pause and see if Tess, do you have anything from the admissions point of view that you want to mention at this point before we go into the second part?
No, I don't have anything to mention. Thank you so much to the panelists for coming and being here today as well. And I'm super excited for this experimental learning portion of it. We will be, we'll be hearing from each of the practical skills opportunities that we have here with the environmental law program. And then we'll be breaking out into breakout rooms, or we'll be letting people speak to each opportunity in breakout rooms after this as well. But yes, thank you so much to the panelists.
Great, thanks. So we're going to move now into the second part of our program. And as Tess mentioned, we're going to hear a little overview from each of them about their particular practical skills offering. And then you'll have an opportunity to get into a breakout room if you want to have a smaller group conversation with any of them. I will also say that, like our other panelists, I know that all of the folks who are going to talk to you next are happy to answer any specific questions that you have about the particular clinic or legal practica that they run at Lewis and Clark. So don't hesitate to reach out to me or any of them with any follow-up questions. I'm just going to introduce folks very quickly because you'll hear more about their backgrounds and their practical skills offerings from them. But we're featuring tonight two of our clinics, which are in the environmental program, Earthrise Law Center and the Global Law Alliance for Animals and the Environment, which we lovingly nickname GLA for short. And then you'll be hearing from two of the folks who run our legal practica. That's a fancy title for practical experience. And we have an environmental natural resources version, and then the Western Resources Legal Center version. So I'm going to start, I'm just going to introduce all four of them, and then let you each go in turn to give your overview. So we'll start with our International Environmental Clinic. And to talk about her work and the work of the clinic is Professor Erica Lyman. She is the director of this clinic, also an alum of the law school, and teaches not only the clinic, but as I mentioned earlier, a wonderful summer course on international wildlife law. And then we'll have Allison LaPlante talk about Earthrise Law Center, which is our wonderful environmental litigation clinic. And Allison is the co-director of Earthrise Law Center and can talk about the wonderful work that they do. Then we have Brad Grenham. Brad runs our Environmental and Natural Resources Legal Practicum, where he works very carefully to have a wonderful list of placements in the Portland area in the environmental law field, where students can work part-time, and then he leads a wonderful class that ties all those themes together, and he'll give you more of a sense of that. And then we have Tate Justison with us, and he is with the Western Resources Legal Center. WRLC does natural resources litigation for resource users and tribes, and does a lot of wonderful work in the Pacific Northwest. And Tate will give you a sense of that more deeply. So with that, Erica, why don't you kick us off with your quick overview of GLA?
Well, thanks, Janice. And thanks to Mimi and everybody who organized this and all the attendees and potential Lewis and Clark students who were so excited to chat with and get to know once you come to Lewis and Clark. So as Janice mentioned, it's kind of a mouthful, the Global Law Alliance for Animals and the Environment. There's always a backstory and some compromise to my very long name, but GLA for short. In a lot of ways, it's self-explanatory. You know, what we do international law. What may not be clear from that is how broadly we interpret that and the diversity of work that we do in the clinic. So just very quickly to sort of give you a quick overview, we kind of have sort of like 3 types of work that we do in the clinic, or we can categorize our work in 3 ways. One sort of stream is that we work on international treaties, right? Like that's, I think, the self-explanatory part. We do work either as advocates for NGOs, for ourselves on particular issues, or as legal advisors to countries and serve on government delegations, as we have in the past with the UNFCCC Paris Agreement negotiations. We regularly attend and participate in the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, the Convention on Migratory Species, and other fisheries-related treaties as well. And then we do a lot of work that is maybe not obvious, but on foreign domestic law. So where there's a link between law in another country and an international treaty obligation or international issue. And that could be to support foreign litigation efforts like we're doing with an oil and gas project we're trying to stop in Namibia. It's also capacity building and training for judges and prosecutors and supporting the adoption of stronger environmental legislation. And then occasionally, like, although we don't litigate, we certainly leave that to the very smart people over at Earthrise. But we might leverage US law where it exists as a potential tool to address an international issue. So using sort of citizen petition mechanisms, whether it's something like what we call the Pelley Amendment, we can ask the government to certify that another country is diminishing the effectiveness of a particular international law, you know, or maybe certain provisions that exist under free trade agreements or other things like that that the US is party to. So a huge range of issues, wildlife, animal-related stuff, habitat, biodiversity, conservation, climate change, and then lots of different tools that we use to address those issues.
Great. Thanks, Erica.
Yeah.
Allison.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Janice, and thanks, Erica, for the lead into the clinics. So I'm Allison LaPlante. I help to run Earthrise Law Center, which is the domestic environmental clinic. And as Erica alluded to, we focus on litigation almost exclusively. Sometimes we do things that are advocacy related, and I can get into that a little bit more in a second, but we're primarily working in federal court on enforcing in one way or another the environmental statutes in the United States. So we were founded in 1996 by Professor Craig Johnston, who you heard from tonight, and another professor, Dan Rolfe, who was not on this call tonight, but is still doing amazing work and teaching at the law school. We were called PEAK, the Pacific Environmental Advocacy Center. And then in 2012, we changed our name to Earthrise Law Center, in part to recognize that we had moved from focusing almost exclusively on the Pacific Northwest to focusing on cases nationwide. And we still do a ton of work in the Northwest. And so if you're interested in Northwest issues, salmon and timber sales and all the kinds of things that I'll talk about in a second, we still do all of that. But we've also brought cases all over the country. And we even have dabbled in some things sort of touching on Erica's work related to, we have one case in the Court of International Trade about the Maui dolphin, which is, there are like about 54 of them left. They're off the North Island of New Zealand, off the coast of the North Island of New Zealand. And so it's a federal court, so it's litigation, but it does touch on international issues. That's a little bit of an outlier, but primarily we work on cases that kind of cut across the spectrum. So we have cases from everything under the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. I think in the course of our time have sued all the major power plants in the Northwest related to air pollution and climate change. We have done several. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary, and we've done decades worth of work to protect Pacific Northwest salmon. And so that has taken form in innumerable lawsuits related to things like the operation of the Columbia River dams, things like what are the proper water quality standards or goals that apply to all of the main rivers that the salmon have to traverse to make their way from their native streams to the ocean. What are the appropriate water quality standards for those rivers? So we've worked on a ton of salmon related issues. We've also and continue to have a pretty healthy docket related to public lands. So that has included cases that challenge the federal government's decision to allow a particular timber sale to go forward, or for example, a particular, we just entered a judgment today in a case that my colleague Tom Buchel has litigated about prospective mining near the near Mount St. Helens National Monument. And so it kind of runs the spectrum of all the different sort of public lands issues. We do a lot of, I would estimate that our work is about 70 to 75% cases against the federal government, which may seem a little bit odd, but it is often the case that irrespective of the administration, that federal decisions need to be challenged in order to make them a little bit better. And so that is a lot of what we do. We also do private enforcement actions against, say, a holder of a Clean Water Act permit who is discharging into the Columbia River or the Willamette River or some other river in another part of the country in violation of their permit. So we do those kind of cases as well. But we pretty much run the gamut of federal environmental statutes. The way that it works in terms of your ability to get involved in Earthrise is that we have three main ways. One is that you can take the clinic as a student, and we urge people to take it for a full year. It's not required, but it is encouraged to take it for a full year because that's where we think you get the best experience, because environmental litigation by its nature doesn't resolve itself super quickly. So if you take the class for a whole year, you get a little bit more, continuity in terms of what you're learning. So it's 3 credits per semester to be a part of the clinic during the school year. We also have summer paid opportunities to be summer clerks. You can also get academic credit and get paid to be a summer clerk. And we usually hire somewhere between 4 and 5 summer law clerks every year. And then every single year we hire a legal fellow. And so we always have 2 legal fellows, like a sort of a junior legal fellow and a senior legal fellow. So we hire one every year and it's for a 2-year position. So then, you can imagine the one cycles through and then the next one starts. So those are the 3 main ways to get involved in Earthrise. But, it's been, there's always questions about whether you should take Earthrise as a 2L or a 3L. I think it's an excellent question. I don't have a solid answer or one way to advise you, but it's definitely only available to 2Ls and 3Ls. And I think probably, My overall gut is that you should take it as a 3L because you have a little bit more experience under your belt and you can get more out of it. And Earthrise is one of those experiences where you sort of you get back what you put in. So when you put in a lot of work, you get a lot of really great feedback and get a lot of really great experience. And so sometimes that's maybe a little easier to do as a 3L. I say that as an alum who took it as a 2L. So, there's no bright line rules, but yeah, that's pretty much Earthrise.
Thank you, Allison. So those are our two clinics, international and domestic environmental issues. And really one of the cool things about our practical skills is we, in addition, have these two really amazing legal practica that honestly, between all of these opportunities, literally cover the waterfront on all the types of experience that you might want as a future environmental lawyer, and experience representing any number of clients from any number of vantage points. And so we'll turn now to those two legal practica that we're really fortunate to have. And Brad, why don't you go ahead and talk about the environmental natural resources one, and then we'll have Tate do the next one.
Thanks, Janice, and thank you, Tess, for organizing this. Tess, fun fact, is a graduate of the Environmental and Natural Resource Practicum. So Tess can tell you some more about the course. I'll distinguish the practicum from the clinics. The clinics are an on-campus experience where you're working with a mentor who is right at the law school or works with the law school. The practicum, I place you with internships in Portland, or we've had some folks work remotely for internships in Washington, D.C., for example, and it's a variety of organizations. So at the present time, this spring, we have students at Oceana, which focuses on ocean conservation, the Center for Biological Diversity, a nationwide environmental group, Cragg Law Center, which focuses on forestry issues in the Northwest, Columbia River Keeper. And aside from nonprofits, we have people at the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality working on environmental enforcement, and we've had people in energy law working in renewable energy, working at utilities, and as well working on animal welfare issues. So it's a broad range, anything roughly related to environmental, natural resource, energy, animal law, etc. We can connect you with an internship. I have about 15 or 20 that I regularly rotate students through, or you can develop your own. You would intern for 10 hours for a week in the internship, and then we meet for 2 hours in class. The focus of the class is practical skills for the new environmental lawyer. I'm an adjunct professor. This is the only course I teach. During the day, I work at the U.S. Department of the Interior Solicitor's Office as an in-house lawyer. You probably know Department of Interior includes the Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Reclamation, etc. So I'm a graduate of Lewis and Clark. 30 years ago, I too was admitted and calling Professor Craig Johnston to ask if I should attend. He talked me into it. I'm very thankful for that. I ended up at Department of Interior in their honors program right after graduation, and obviously it's been a good fit for me. I'm still there, and they apparently like me okay. So our classroom, what do we do in the class? Nuts and bolts for the new environmental lawyer. For the last 3 weeks, we've done a case study of a water rights hearing that I handled years ago. And we go through the problem, what you do if this landed on your desk as a new lawyer, what type of negotiations you might undertake, what type of discovery. Just last night, we acted out the hearing with people doing the question and answer from the transcript that I still have from the hearing. And students got to see how these questions and answers are asked at hearing and how they eventually turn into a court's opinion. So we try to focus on practical skills, and students do 3 presentations during the course of the semester. It's a small class, usually with about 10 students. So in that informal, friendly atmosphere, I take advantage of that forum to let students get experience teaching, explaining a legal problem, a law, environmental issue, just to get more and more experience explaining things, because as a lawyer, whether you're a lawyer, an advocate, a policymaker, you need to be able to be a compelling verbal advocate. And we take advantage of this opportunity to give you plenty of practice doing that. I would say just come out to the law school, sign up for the class for these wonderful clinics. All the hands-on experience you can get will help you understand where you want to head, what you like, what you don't, and maybe might even land you a job. So welcome.
Great. Thank you, Brad. Tate, tell us about the wonderful WRLC experience.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tate Justison. I'm a staff attorney at the Western Resources Legal Center. I'll refer to it as WRLC moving forward, just so I don't have to say all of those words at once. So when I say WRLC, that's what I'm talking about. I'm also here on behalf of Caroline Lobdell. She's the executive director of the program, and she was unable to be here this evening, but she did want me to make sure I did a brief introduction on the Indian law program that she is in charge of. We have tribes as clients and working relationship with tribes through WRLC, but Caroline wanted me to make sure I let everyone know who's watching that there is a place in Indian country for anyone who is interested through the program that she runs with the Indian law. And so please, reach out to her if you have any interest in that. We do have good working relationships with a number of tribes throughout the Northwest and throughout the country. So, and with that, if you have any further follow-up that you need on the Indian law program, please reach out to Caroline. Her information is easy to find on our Western Resources Legal Center website, or you can ask Janice or anyone else involved with the Natural Resources Environmental Program. So I'll focus now on the part that I'm more involved with on a day-to-day basis, which is the Western Resources Legal Center. We are a legal practicum course, 4 credits. We are available to 2 L's and 3 L's, but it's an application process to get involved with the program. But I would tell you, as incoming 1 L's, if you're interested in natural resources, environmental work, and getting good practical skills, come and talk to us. The earlier, the better. We can help you decide whether 2 or 3 L year works better for you in the context of the program and what you want to do and what your goals are. So kind of like Allison, it's we don't really have a recommendation, but depending on someone's personal circumstances, it might depend on our advice might change a little bit depending on what your class load is and where your interests lie. So come see us early, and we can try to help guide that process. So what we do is we provide a unique perspective amongst all the other great programs and practical skills programs here at Lewis and Clark. We represent natural resource dependent communities, individuals, and businesses. We really focus on the perspective of rural America. So our clientele is ranchers, farmers, sometimes miners, timber folks. And so we get that perspective, and we think it's a really valuable one for interested students. And you don't necessarily have to be tied to representing natural resource dependent folks to come be part of our program, but we think it's a really valuable perspective for students to get if they have any interest in getting a really well-rounded perspective on that. So anyway, come talk to us and we can help you figure out which way you want to go. Our program, really, we do litigation, a lot of federal litigation. That's where kind of the meaty stuff is. With litigation these days, we litigate things regarding NEPA, FLIPMA, APA, and NIFMA. So those are a lot of the areas and a lot of the federal statutes we work with, federal administrative law, and some Clean Water Act and Endangered Species Act work as well. And it kind of all ties in together. There's a lot of overlap with the natural resource using community, natural resources dependent communities in rural America and how they're using lands for their livelihoods. And there's a lot of crossover between that and the environmental laws that are in place. And we're not just focused on the federal level. We also do a lot of state law work. There's water law matters that come across our desk. A lot of public records issues on the state and federal level that we deal with. And so there's a lot of good practical work that we do in all of those areas. So we have irrigators on the state level, a lot of water rights are on the state level, for example. So do a lot of state work there. One thing I wanted to make sure that I told you is kind of how the dynamics of the class work. It's a small class, so anywhere from 3 to 6 students generally are in the practicum each term. And as a student, like, you apply, you'll come and talk to us, and then if it works out, you'll sign up for the class. And each student is required to do one presentation at least per term. I mean, if you want to volunteer to do more, we're not going to stop you, but the minimum is to do one kind of teaching presentation a term for each student during the class. And that's 2 hours per week. And then the other part of the practicum credit, the other 2 credits of the 4-credit class come in the form of practical skills work through working with us as your supervisor, and also potentially with other folks in private practice or other natural resource, environmental focused areas that can help you get good work. And we teach you through the cases that we're working on. So when we come to class, and when you come to class, you're going to be learning about the cases that we are litigating or have litigated. And we try to teach, we call it, it's kind of a beefed up civil procedure. So we like to start you out learning about how is a case filed and where do we go from there, walking through the discovery process, the document exchange. And we really want to make sure that people have a working, functional understanding of how everything works in a practical sense with a case. So we try to take the kind of abstract of civil procedure and show you how that works as a functioning working attorney when you take our case. And these cases, they're at the cutting edge of policy a lot of times, so they're very interesting cases to be working on. So trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to make sure I conveyed in my brief introduction, but yeah, no, I think we offer a unique perspective, and I look forward to answering any questions anyone has about the program. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Brad and Tate. Great summaries. So I think potential students, you can see the value of having all of these choices and how well they mesh with your coursework, right? So you're learning a lot of substantive law in your courses. You get to actually do on the ground, real client work with all 4 of these opportunities. With that, we're going to move into our breakout rooms.